As we meet on this historic Sunday after the election of 2020, President-elect Biden has won the sufficient number of electoral college votes to become our next president. So if you're coming here excited today, I say great. Celebrate, pat yourself on the back, and honestly, no person, maybe in the entire country, deserves more credit or praise than our own Vice President, Annabelle Park, who, if you don't know, broadcasts daily to activists how they can get involved, how they can register, how they can vote. She creates ads. So Annabelle, on behalf of all the winners yesterday, you should take a bow and you should celebrate for all of us. But if you're side one and you're excited, celebrate. I understand that in DC, they sold more champagne than in 2 years of New Year's Eve celebration. So there's a lot of happiness in DC. One of the funny things is I live in DC, which went 96% for President-elect Biden. And my cabin, where I do sometimes broadcast, is in West Virginia, which went about 88% for President Trump, and they're only 2 hours away. So we live in a very divided country. If you're angry today that the President Trump lost, I say take some downtime. It's okay to feel sad and frustrated. Give yourself a break from the news. Now, I've been looking at the results, and I'm sure you have too if I'm a bit of a junkie on this stuff. But the big takeaway for me from the results is that there was actually very little movement from one side to the other over 4 years. We had 4 years of people trying to convince their best friends on Facebook to switch sides. It doesn't look like that many people really changed sides. Instead, what it appears is the campaigns dug deeper into their own tribe, their own votes. And then it's even more complicated because even places where President Trump lost votes, Republicans won votes on the down ticket. So people actually split tickets, which they don't do much anymore. So we'll be watching these results. But what it does seem is that we are really divided. 2016 was not an anomaly. And that's very important for us to process. There has always been a belief in Washington among political consultants and tribes and activists that this is the year we're going to wipe out and crush our opponents ruthlessly, all of them, and we're going to take back the House and the Senate and the White House. It's always the mantra. And it has not happened in many, many years where there's been a crushing landslide, which means that we're going to have to figure out how we resolve it as Americans. Now, I can tell you, living in DC and being politically active, the partisans who are paid to do this, they're going to advocate digging deeper trenches, sort of like World War I, where they dug the trench, they gained a few yards, lost a few yards, but the carnage just kept building up. But there's a business incentive to that model too. It drives a lot of people's salaries and businesses and social media and so forth. So they will be doing it, that strategy of deeper trenches. But I can tell you that viewpoint has very little of a view or respect for the common good. As we read when Swedenborg was describing heaven today, he said, it's really the government's whole purpose is for the common good. And that's something we've really gotten away from as a nation, the idea there's a common good, not my side or your side, but that we could all win. And so I want to focus today less on those partisans who want to dig deeper ditches and dig bigger trenches and keep, and be in a perpetually paralyzed situation of what's becoming quite bitter hatred of people who disagree with me. And I want to talk about how we, as a church and as Christians, can play a role in breaking that cycle. The cycle must be broken, and we must find a way to heal America. So it's interesting. When I say church, you might think to yourself, I don't think of church as having any ability to play a role. And I'm going to make a case today that church has a unique role in leading on this. Now, I know many church leaders are themselves quite partisan and quite visible, but I'm talking about the broader church, the church that I've experienced. I spent calls this week on the National Council of Church leadership call, Board of Governors, which I represent for our denomination, and I've done a lot of calls with other ministers. And what they're really wrestling with is how are they going to deal with this within their own church? I think it's a great opportunity for all of us. There are a number of reasons, and I think the first reason that churches could really play a key role in this is that as we are today, and we do each week, churches are one of the last places that people actually come together from very diverse places, diverse communities. And we have people in this worship service who are in their 80s. We have people in their 20s. We have a variety of races, sexual orientation. We have a variety of political affiliations. People voted on all sides in the election. And so that diversity is actually quite unique in the culture. And on that basis alone, I think churches can play a role. You know that last year, Annabelle and I started a podcast, Democracy in America. We weren't very consistent with it, but the overriding message was, though we can disagree on political issues, we can pattern for the public ways to love each other. And I think churches can demonstrate that, and that's a key element. Why else could churches play a key role in healing the country? Well, as Christians, we have a very unique mandate. I don't think any other faith in the world has a teaching to love your enemies. I believe, I can be corrected on that, but as far as my understanding of other faiths, all faiths say, love your neighbor and be kind, and love your God. That's a very common theme. But the only faith I think that I can think of that says love your enemies is Christianity. Now, we largely ignore that commandment. It's not very convenient. It's not very comfortable. We think Jesus is speaking spiritually here, but it is a command of Jesus. And he models that when he prays on the cross for the people who killed him, when he helps a Roman soldier who's an occupying force with his assistant, when he calls tax collectors the most despised people in the community to follow him. And even after Christ's departure from earth, his disciples recruit the Apostle Paul. Now, the Apostle Paul, who writes a lot of the New Testament, was a religious leader who actually took place in the stoning of the disciple Stephen. So they were looking at literally enemies, and enemies became much a critical part of the early church. So I think it's important for each of us to think about a candidate, a political party that we really dislike, and visualize that, and figure out in our hearts, what can we shift to love that person? Again, loving in this sense is not mean agreeing. Try to make that point over and over. But to love, even though we disagree, is the command of Christ. And it is completely unique, certainly unique in the culture. So we have an obligation to really unlock the love of our enemies. The third part, I think, that Christianity offers a unique position is what I said when we started worship today, that we confess our sins. The Christian faith is built upon a concept that to grow spiritually, you have to first reflect on yourself, seek what you need to change, and then with the Lord's help, change. But that first part, self-awareness, is the critical step of all spiritual growth. And so the gospel lesson today about this, the very famous gospel lesson, take the log out of your own eye before you take the speck out of others. As Christians, whenever we feel an energy that we have a ability to criticize other people, we're quickly reminded. It should be almost a spiritual reflex to say, okay, I'm wanting to condemn them. What do I need to change? Or another way to think about it, if Jesus was talking to you right now, sitting with you, would there be parts of your life that Jesus would not be happy with? If you're a human being, the answer is yes. There's things that we're all seeking to change. We're all working on it. And so is everybody else. So we need that ability to reflect. That's a critical part of our faith. And anytime we feel that we can be self-righteous in condemnation of others, it should kick in that we need to reflect too. Doesn't mean that we don't believe there's a truth. So let me move to the next point. We are pledged to uphold the truth as Christians. And what I'm struck with is how complicated that is. The idea of a truth has been pretty much lost in what's called a postmodern culture, where that is, your truth is your truth, my truth is my truth. There is no truth with a capital T. But for Christians, we do believe there are certain truths, capital T truths. One of them is to love one another. That's a truth. We're supposed to do it. Another is to love our enemy. We don't live up to it, but it's a truth. It's a truth from our teachings. But I think the way we can understand this idea of the truth is that many people hold different views and a different perspective on the truth. And if we're curious, we can see the truth through their eyes. So, for example, there are many who would say America has a deep history of racism, which I've preached on. It exists at all levels of society. And if you said that to me, I would say, yes, that's true. Other people would say, Rich, I'm a more of a fundamentalist Christian, and I really feel a secular progressive culture has it in for me and my church. I think they might even want to put me out of business. There's some truth there. There are people who would have said, the elites have created an economic system that benefits them financially while making it very hard for others to even break in to the economy and the workplace. I would say that's true. People would say that they would fear the mobs of protesters. They frighten them. I could see why that's true. Those who would fear racism, anti-Semitism, anti-gay forces, and say, look, they could threaten me with violence. I would say, yes, that's true. There would be those who would say America was founded on the original sin of slavery, and I would say, that's true. And there would be those who would say that America is a beacon of light to the world for freedom. And I think that's true. My point is that there are many truths with many different stories, many different narratives, and they all contribute to the capital T truth. And I think we have to act in humility when we think that only our perspective is the truth, and we can't see the truth through another's eyes. Another important factor, which I've spoken about in earlier sermons, but I think it's so key for Christians, is the blessing of forgiveness. We will pray every week, forgive my sins as I forgive others' sins. It's critical to the Christian life to forgive others. We're losing forgiveness in our culture, and Christians need to bring that back in. I call this the politics of forgiveness. How can I state up front, I'm going to say something and I may offend you, please forgive me? Or what you just said hurts my feelings, but I understand that you're going for something else. That's what I would say is an important blessing of forgiveness. We need it. We're human beings. We're going to make mistakes with one another. We're going to step in on each other's toes. So bringing forgiveness back in to a culture that's often called a cancel culture. You make a mistake and your life could be destroyed by it. That doesn't work. We have to find a way to forgive people for their mistakes and forgive ourselves. Another important part of the Christian faith that I think can be helpful here is most of us want to avoid conflict. Have you had the person on Facebook say something where you were like, I really want to respond, but you know what? I'm not going to get into it. Or a conversation, it's not going to be very profitable to engage. But the downside of that, now I think that makes sense. Sometimes you just don't want to waste your time. But we in the churches and the culture, we've come to avoid conflict. And that has allowed people who are the loudest voice often to speak out. This last few months, I started a series of topics that ministers never speak on. And one of my friends who heard some of the topics said, how long before you get fired from that church? Because you can't talk about abortion or transgendered or climate change or money or any of that stuff, the people will really, they will want to get rid of you. Someone's going to be offended by that. To the credit of this community, and we are a small and powerful community, I only got feedback that said, more power, please do more of this, keep it up. And people said, I don't agree with what you said, which is great. But conflict is critical to growth. It's critical in our spiritual teaching that we grow spiritually more through conflict. So we need it to grow, and we need it to grow as a country. We just need very wise and safe containers where it can grow. And I believe church can play that role. And then finally, I want to stress that Christians, we have a long view of things. I think that's very important. Very often I'll say that we have a view of life that includes an eternal life in heaven. And that puts things that are happening right now in perspective. They do not, let me repeat, they do not absolve us from activity in our lives or in social justice, as some churches teach. But they put us in a perspective. How important will be the things that I'm so worried about today be in the long run? I think we need to do more of thinking about how change will take place with a longer view of things. For many years, many of you know I've been involved with this sort of this democracy movement where we work to build bridges. And people say, well, knock yourself out. I don't think it's going to work. I think that the long view of things is powerful. And I wonder, share with you a poem that someone quoted to me this week. It's called the Romero Prayer, and it's by Bishop Ken Utner, a Catholic bishop of Saginaw. And it really, I thought it was beautifully written as to help us think of the long view. And it goes like this. The kingdom is not only beyond our efforts, it's beyond our vision. We accomplish in our lifetime only a tiny fraction of the magnificent enterprise that is God's work. Nothing we do is complete, which is a way of saying the kingdom always lies beyond us. No statement says all that could be said. No prayer fully expresses our faith. No confession brings perfection. No pastoral visit brings wholeness. No program accomplishes the church mission. No set of goals and objectives includes everything. This is what we are about. We plant the seeds that one day will grow. We water seeds already planted, knowing that they hold future promise. We lay foundations that will need further development. We provide yeast that produces far beyond our capabilities. We cannot do everything. And there is a sense of liberation in realizing that. This enables us to do something and to do it very well. It may be incomplete, but it is the beginning, a step along the way, an opportunity for the Lord's grace to enter and for us to do the rest. I really love that idea from this poem that we are prophets of a future that we do not own. The work of building and healing our country may take generations, but I think the church, with our diverse congregations, with our teaching to love our enemies, with our teaching of self-reflection, with our pledge to follow the truth, with our teaching of and blessing of forgiveness, our recognition that conflict is crucial, and our heavenly view that we can take a long view on this, all help us play a critical role in changing our nation and healing it. And I'll end with a quote from President Abraham Lincoln that we should all keep on our minds at this moment. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passions may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic chord of memory will swell when again touched, as surely as they will be by the better angels of our nature. Amen.